Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, hello. How we doing? Everybody okay? All right. My name is Mark Ramirez, and myself, along with my wife, we are Chickpea and Bean. All right. So she loves chickpeas. I'm Mexican. I love beans, and that's where Chickpea and Bean came from. Um, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for being with us here tonight. We certainly know you could be other places today at 2 p.m. and instead you choose to be here with us. So thank you very much for coming and joining us here today. I would also like to thank a couple of our sponsors, actually three of our sponsors, and that is Whole Foods Market. So Susan Bellinson and Marianne Nicely, thank you so much. Veg Michigan, Paul Kraus, thank you very much. And Back to Roots, PC and Shwaroop, thank you very much for allowing us to make this event happen. I'm pretty passionate, about this subject and about this topic. And my message today is a message of one of hope. Hope because when we look around us, we look at loved ones, family, or maybe some of us might be experiencing some struggles in our life when it comes to chronic illness. And Lord knows I've had my share of that. My entire family has been battling chronic illness ever since I can remember. And so just a brief rundown in history on that is my mother passed away at the young age of 61. She had been battling diabetes for over 33 years. She had a kidney transplant. She was legally blind, years of dialysis, years of shots, insulin shots, and ultimately needed a double bypass operation, which unfortunately she never recovered from. She died in 2002. My oldest brother, at 41 years old, passed away with pancreatic cancer. Very young. I have a twin brother. We're 47 years old this year. He has been diabetic over a decade, taking pills and several medications. He had a heart attack roughly 5 months ago, and he continues to be sick. My little sister, Sandra, she is just a few years younger than us. She started insulin shots about 3 months ago. She's been diabetic over a decade, taking several medications. And my little brother, who is the youngest of us all, he's 43 years old. He was diagnosed with diabetes at the young age of 13. He's had his right leg amputated. He's had a pancreas and kidney transplant. He's legally blind. He does dialysis 3 times a week. And he takes 25 medications every single day. So now we get to me. In 2002, I was also diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. I'd been to the doctor, and my sugars were high, and so I was trying to fight him, keep him at bay, saying, hold on, doc, let me exercise more, let me eat better, let me try to keep this at bay, because I'd seen what it done to my entire family. So in 2004, my sugars were still too high, and it was time to begin the medications. So I started taking medications in 2004, and as the years progressed, my diabetes continued to get worse. And along the way, I ended up taking, metformin. I start with metformin. Then I jumped to Januvia. Then it was your cholesterol's a little high. Let's give you some simvastatin to control your cholesterol. Hey, next thing I know, my blood pressure's a little high, so now they're putting me on lisinopril. And ultimately, it came down to the point where in 2011, my A1C was 10.5. And if there's any diabetics out there, that's a relatively high number for anybody. But so they started me on insulin shots. I was taking 2 insulin shots and 4 oral medications at 43 years old. So I had tried different things throughout the years. I tried to count carbs, watch my calories, exercise more. And while I would experience some peaks where I might feel a little better or I might lose a little bit of weight, I was never able to eliminate my medications. So I was still sick, even though I was doing and trying these different things to improve my health. So in 2011, December 3rd, actually, as a matter of fact, December 3rd of 2011, my wife and I watched a documentary by the name of Forks Over Knives. Anyone here heard of that? Yeah, there we go. A lot of hands up. That's great. And Forks Over Knives was obviously largely inspired by the book, The China Study. So, it is one of my honors to have our guest speaker here today. We're going to get into that here in a few minutes. But we saw Forks Over Knives. I read Dr. Neil Bernard's program for reversing diabetes. We began that lifestyle on December 3rd of 2011. And by January 30th of 2012, so 60 days roughly later, I was off all 5 of my medications. And I stand before you almost 4 years later, still free of all medications. And yeah, thank you. Thank you. And I can't lie to you because my doctor's in the audience. He's sitting right there. So he knows. He checked me around the June time frame and everything was good. So again, the message is one of hope, and I wanted to just share that with you. I'm going to go through a few slides here real quick. For those of you who don't know, I actually played football here for Bo Schembechler. I was a right guard. When I played here, I was 305 pounds. Today I weigh 210, so I'm about 100 pounds lighter than I was back in 1989, which is when this picture was taken. And I weigh roughly what I weighed in 6th grade. I think it was 6th grade, I weighed 210. So I was a big 6th grader, I get it. But that was me in 1989. We fast forward a few years later. So there's me now. If you look at that picture, I don't look very healthy. I look like I'm carrying way too much weight. I got some bags around my eyes. And that little girl there, where are you? Raise your hand. She's right there. So that's my daughter. She graduated from Michigan this last May. But that was 1997, roughly. So there's me. We go again. This is fast forward to 2011. This is on my daughter's senior trip, high school senior trip. We went on a cruise to Mexico. You can see still a little pudgy around the pants there, kind of busting a little bit at the seams, a little chubby in the face. Now this next slide that I'm going to show you, if you're a little queasy or don't like some graphic photos, there are pictures of my brother's amputation. So if it's something you don't want to see, I ask you to close your eyes. But this is my little brother's right foot. We talked about an amputation. This is what it looks like. And I show it not to gross anybody out, but to tell you this is reality. Amputations and blindness, diabetes is the leading cause of amputations and blindness around the world. So they took his 4 toes first. Oh, this thing's going. I hit the wrong button. Hold on. So they took his 4 toes first because he had a blood blister on the top of his right foot. Tried to clean it out. That did not work, so his toes were beginning to get gangrene, and they had to chop them off. Next, because the circulation was so poor in his ankle, they had to take his leg right below his right knee. So that's his right leg about a week and a half or so after his amputation. And here are my medications. In 2011, you can see my Lantus. I got simvastatin, lisinopril, metformin, my testing strips. This is all the stuff that I would carry around and needed to keep the insulin cold. It was just a real big pain to manage all this. And I needed to change. And why did I need to change? Because I have these 2 guys. So my daughter and my son, they're both here in the audience. Raise your hands. Where are you? Yeah, there we go, those 2 guys and gals. So this is why I did not want to go through life the way that my family had and my mother and all the sickness and all the disease. So here's what I did again, Forks Over Knives. If any of you are not familiar, it is free on Netflix. If you have subscribed to Netflix, you have the movie now. Dr. Neil Bernard's book as well. And here, just real quick, I want to show the power of what food can do in a very, very short period of time. If you look on the left, to your left, and around the middle of the screen, you'll see my lipid panel, or cholesterol, 164 total cholesterol. My triglycerides are 192. My HDL is 39, and my LDL is 87. So that was one of the worst readings I had. If you drop down just a little bit further, you'll see my hemoglobin A1C, 10.5. So this reading was September of 2011. We adopted a whole foods plant-based lifestyle on December 3rd of 2011. And this next reading over here to your right, that's December 29th of 2011, or 26 days into me changing the foods I ate. Let's look at my cholesterol now. Cholesterol's 104, dropped 60 points. Triglycerides, 111, dropped 80 points. My HDL stayed about the same at 38. My LDL, or the bad cholesterol, was dropped in half to 44. Now keep in mind, I'm still on medication for this, which ultimately I was able to get and remove it. But look at my hemoglobin A1C, 10.5 to 8.1. I don't know if there's any medication that'll drop 2.5 points A1C in 26 days. So this is the power of food, and this is why my wife and I are adamant and passionate about trying to share this message and this information. There's me. That's 2012. Remember the pants I showed you on the cruise? Those are those same pants. 45 pounds later. I lost 45 pounds in 3 months, and I pretty much have been the same weight ever since. pretty significant difference. Here is one of my, not my most recent, but one of the most recent readings of my, my A1C. You can see it's now 5.5, normal, average. My cholesterol, this is without any medications. I've been medication-free almost 4 years now. 146, 84, 46, 83, all the numbers are normal. The power of food. My wife and I, again, Chickpea and Bean, we have a website. There's free resources on there. We are not selling anything, but we link to a bunch of doctors, websites, recipes, a bunch of information on this website that is available for you to go and peruse through and look at and try to hopefully help you understand, you know, about this lifestyle. Hold on. Where did that slide go? I missed one, but that's okay. One of the other things I'm going to mention here real quickly before I bring up Dr. Trapp, there was another slide that basically talked about other benefits. So I talk about cholesterol, high blood pressure, and diabetes. But I also had psoriasis really bad on my scalp to where if I scratched my head, I'd just get a whole slew of skin falling off. That disappeared. I used to get heartburn 3 and 4 times a week very badly, so much that I had Pepcid AC, Zantac, and Tums in the car, at the office, at the house. It was everywhere because I would frequently get heartburn. And another thing, and where are my kids? Close your ears, kids. All kids. But ED was another thing that was beginning to, you know, it's a symptom and a result of diabetes and all these medications. And quite honestly, I think my arteries were beginning to clog. So all of that improved itself so much so that my wife now goes, "Get out of here, leave me alone, stay away," right? Anyway, but I'll just tell you that it is so powerful. Food is so powerful, and if you're sick of being sick, if you have loved ones that are sick, if they've tried everything, people look at this and go, "That's crazy. What do you mean you don't eat meat? What do you mean you don't eat chicken? What do you mean you don't drink milk?" I am the healthiest and in the best shape that I've been in over 20 years, and it's because of the foods I'm eating. So I am encouraging you all, if you're not familiar, please, and I think many of you are, that's why you're here, but for those loved ones, if you yourself are dealing with an issue, a chronic illness, please, we are here to help too. If there's anything we can do to help support you, we're here local. Chickpea and Bean, we have meetings monthly. They're free and open to the public. We have them in Clinton Township. And we're actually doing some things here with the university, with the athletic department. So, you know, Kim and I and our whole family is tied to Michigan very dearly. In fact, what's the score? Does anyone have the score? It was 6-0 last I checked. I hope so, but never underestimate, because, you know, we have had some teams sneak up on us, right? But so anyhow, I want to thank you so much again for coming. Please believe in the power of food. It can really, really help in so many different ways. Chickpea, we have some business cards on the back. Feel free to grab those. And at this point, I'm going to bring up Dr. Carolyn Trapp. She's a near and dear friend of ours and very supportive of Chickpea and Bean. And Dr. Trapp is the Director of Diabetes Education and Care for the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. So without further ado, Dr. Carolyn Trapp.
Thank you. Whoops. Thank you, Mark. It's a privilege to be here with all of you today and to have the privilege of introducing our esteemed guest. But before I do, I just want to I want to commend Mark for so bravely telling his story and working so hard to be in front of so many audiences where he could share the power of food and the difference it's made in his life. So let's give him a round of applause. So I just have to tell you, I'm a U of M grad, School of Nursing, class of 1985. I had my first nutrition class here. We learned about tofu. I thought it was really great. And that was about all I did with plant-based nutrition after I graduated for a number of years. And I've been a nurse practitioner in primary care for a number of years, about 16 or 17 years in Southfield. And when I first learned about this nutrition approach, and I have to say that one of the things that was the most influential to me in learning about plant-based nutrition and sharing it with my patients was this book called The China Study. And it gave me great confidence that there was good research behind this approach. And the doctors I work with weren't so sure about this. They were a little nervous that, I was going to tell my patients they couldn't eat meat, and was this going to work, and weren't they going to think that was kind of weird? But over time, as they saw patients lose weight and get better and not need so much insulin, they've come right along with me. So, and then I was fortunate enough to start working with the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. How many of you are familiar with PCRM? Okay, great. So if you're not, you should know there's cards on the table out there. Physicians Committee offers a 21-day Kickstart program. It's online, it's free, it's 21 days of menus, meal plans, grocery lists. It goes live the first of every month. So if you haven't checked it out, or you've got friends or family who are interested but they don't know what to eat, it's a great place to start. And the website is 21-day Kickstart. Okay, but enough about me. So let's talk about Dr. Thomas Campbell, who is a clinician with he's a board-certified family practice. He has a full practice in Rochester, New York. He is also the co-founder and clinical director of the Program for Nutrition in Medicine at the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry, which really just warms my heart to think that medical students and dentistry students are getting access to nutrition as part of their education. He's also an educator, and he's the medical director and educator with the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies in Ithaca, New York, which is a nonprofit organization which promotes optimal nutrition for science-based education and advocacy and research in partnership with Cornell University's online provider. And they offer a great certificate. It's a 6-week program. I encourage you to check it out if you'd like to do an online nutrition education around plant-based nutrition. So Dr. Campbell graduated in 1999 from Cornell, and in addition to working with his father on the China Study, he's an author of his very own book called The Campbell Plan. And this was published in 2015, and I have to tell you, it's very readable, and it's got a lot of great recipes. So if you don't have it, I encourage you to check it out. And then finally, I wanted to share that what you may not know about Dr. Campbell is that he almost chose a very different career path. He was on his way. He was actually a successful actor who's been seen on stages in Chicago and all over the country east of the Mississippi and in London, and was pursuing a career in acting when this opportunity, certainly I think being in a household with T. Colin Campbell was a great inspiration, and he recognized from his work on the China Study that this was a great opportunity to integrate his passions for language and for health. So he went on to medical school, and I would think that that knowing how to have a stage presence is not a bad thing in medicine, but we are especially lucky that he's doing the work that he's doing now in medicine and helping a next generation and being part of this family legacy of passing on excellent information about good nutrition. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Thomas Campbell.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you, Mark and Kim, and everyone else involved in this event. It's really wonderful. It's wonderful to see all of you here. I think perhaps the most inaccurate and biggest stretch of any of the introductions for me I've heard so far is that I was a successful actor. I was an assistant paralegal working late-night shows in Chicago at a hole-in-the-wall, bring-your-own-beer kind of place. So I have a presentation here that is going to cover where we are as a society with nutrition and our health, where we are in medicine, and I think where we need to go. And we'll have some questions at the end, have some time for a Q&A at the end. So where are we right now as a society? What's our state of health? we actually hear quite a bit of conflicting things about this. We hear mixed messages. We hear these gloom and doom, horrible things, but then we hear stories like this where a woman who's 104 years old in Texas, I don't know if you heard about this woman, she's quite active and vigorous. You can see her there on the left, and she drinks 3 sodas a day. It's her staple. She's been doing it for many, many decades. And the fact that she is 104 years old, very vigorous and doing well, yet drinking 3 sodas a day somehow was worthy of really pretty major news coverage. CNN, Fox, all the local cable channel affiliates, ABC, online. The CEO of the soda company sent her a whole big giant gift box. That made another round of news. And so, or alternatively, you may have heard of this story of this woman on the right, a French woman who is actually the oldest woman ever known with good documentation to have lived, who lived to be 122 years old before she passed away. And of course, the story is that she enjoyed cigarettes, and she actually smoked for almost 100 years until she couldn't see well enough to light the end of the cigarette at like 115. She really loved olive oil, wine, and lots of chocolate every week. And so that was the big story there. So what's the message? It's all genes. It's all just chance. It doesn't really matter anyway. Go ahead and do all this stuff that you want to do. Okay, so we get that message actually quite a bit, but on the other hand, we hear some gloom and doom. So where do I live? As a practicing family physician, and I've gotten that too. I've gotten variations of this issue, of this question in interviews and stuff. People say, I had one radio interview, the guy was like, well, how are we doing so well? How are we doing so well? And I just thought, well, you need to stick around with me for a couple days and come to clinic and see how we're doing. How are we doing in this country? Almost 1 out of 10 of us have diabetes. Over 1 out of 3 of us have pre-diabetes, and most of those people with pre-diabetes don't know they have the diagnosis yet. And of course, we know that we have many of us struggle with weight. 70% of us are overweight overweight or are obese. And if you look at in this country, we are a diagnosed group of people. We're diagnosed with this, that, or something else. And among adults aged 55 to 64, now keep in mind, I think of this group 55 to 64, these are my younger patients. These are people who are still working full-time. They haven't reached retirement. Okay, they should have absolutely full function, vigor, activity. And if you look in this country, 75% of this age group are on a prescription medication. And 20% of this age group, and by the way, this is an age group now that's including Kevin Costner, sort of Iron Men. These should be full of energy. 20% of this group are taking 5 or more meds, 5 or more prescription meds. So we are not healthy. The 104-year-old who's doing very well drinking 3 cans of soda a day is not the norm. The norm is to be ill. In fact, we've adapted to a new normal, and I think it's one of the best features of our humanity is that we can adapt to difficult situations. And so I think a lot of the people I see are actually living in a fairly severe state of illness and sickness, but you know what? The rest of their family is, many of their friends are, and they at some point you adapt to it and you don't realize that things could be much better, and you just kind of live in this state. And so that's where we are. It's very normal to be on medication and have many diagnoses and see your doctor a bunch. The medications we use are cardiovascular disease medications, cholesterol-lowering drugs, heartburn meds, painkillers, analgesics, depression meds, and diabetes medicines. These are, of this age group, these are the most typical medications we use, the 6 most common medications. And you could argue certainly about depression not being related per se or driven, but so I think it is related in some ways. But the other 5, heart disease, cholesterol, heartburn, pain, these are unequivocally, even by any conservative people, these are strongly related to our diet and lifestyles. So we have a problem in this country that's rampant. We are diagnosed with diet and lifestyle related problems. We're seeing our doctors and taking pills for it. And that's the norm. This is the normal. This is normal. And it costs us. Okay, so if you look at the total expenditures from employers, individuals, and so forth, per person in this country, we spend almost $9,000 per year on health care, on trying to stay healthy. Really, it's disease care, right? And just it's a little bit apples and oranges, but just keep in mind that the median household income, the income of all the people in the median house in this country, is $53,000. And per person, as a culture, we're spending almost $9,000. So this is costing our employers. This is costing our governments. We've heard many stories about this for many years, and it's not going to resolve anytime soon. This is a big problem. And one way that I describe this problem is using this graph. And many of you may have heard of the idea of squaring the curve sort of idea. And if you haven't, this is what it is. You look on this column, on the vertical axis here, we have health. So up here, on the high up here on this, you have very good health, good function. And down here, you're just about dead. At birth, you're starting out pretty well. And then in this country, this is the common pathway, you might have some weight struggles. And for some of us, that might be after college. But for many of us, increasingly, that's starting in elementary school, and middle school, high school. Very, very common. You might start some blood pressure pills in your 20s, 30s, and get told this is probably for the rest of your life. And then it starts to take a toll, the weight, the pills, the blood flow, you have poor energy, some pain, and you might have a heart attack now in your 60s, 70s. You might survive it, be lucky, but you end up with some heart failure, some limitations, and then you have dementia, end up in the nursing home, and death. Now this is what I see and what I treat and what I work with all the time. So for me, from my point of view, where I'm sitting, this is normal. This is our common expectation in this country. Alternately, I see a lot of people who have diagnoses and see pills, and they think they're doing great. They have heartburn, they maybe have weight struggles, but the heartburn's well controlled with Prilosec. They take that every day. They have high cholesterol, but they're on a statin. The numbers look great, no problems. So they're feeling great. But have you known anybody this has happened to? And most people, of course, do know that this is a tragic tragedies that occur. People think it's out of nowhere, but of course it's not out of nowhere. So what do we want? Ideally, doing things the right way. We want very full health and function all the way up into our later years, and then we have a mild infection and maybe pass away in our sleep. That's sort of the ideal, what people might, if you pressed them, what they might come up with how they would want it to happen. But can we do that? We do know that we can do that. We do know that we can do that, and diet and lifestyle makes a huge difference in this. This was a study, the EPIC study. At one of the sites at the EPIC study followed 23,000 people in Europe for 8 years, and they looked at the people for these 8 years who were doing all the right things, and they saw to check to see how well they did with chronic disease. So what they looked is people who had never smoked, people who were exercising half an hour a day. And this was at a location where a lot of people bike, as part of their bike to work from. So a fair number of people actually exercise that much. These were people who were not, they were either normal weight or overweight and just not obese. And they had a better than average diet. So they had more fruits, vegetables, whole grains, less red meat. Mind you, this was not looking at a fantastic diet. Like literally they were better than average. It was the top 50% of the population had a diet. And with these relatively simple characteristics, if someone did all of these things, if you compared the people who did all of these things to the people who did none of these things, you found that they had a 36% reduced risk of getting cancer, they had a 50% reduced risk of having a stroke, they had an 81% reduced risk of having a heart attack, and a 93% reduced risk of getting diabetes. And when you looked at all these diagnoses that happened in this population over the 8 years, you saw that there was almost an 80% reduced risk of any of these illnesses by the people who were living with these healthy characteristics. Really pretty simple things, actually. So I think that our diet and lifestyle is the key to having that ideal life curve. But I'm not just talking about prevention. Okay, so here's the three curves, and here's the sort of common one I see day in, day out. Okay, or I see this up here. And by the time I see patients, this is a far away, distant reality. This is, forget that. I'm not perfect. I'm not going to be perfect. I can't be perfect right away. But what's very exciting to me is that I'm not just talking about prevention. I'm actually talking about treatment. So diet and lifestyle, and I'll talk about some of the evidence. Diet and lifestyle can actually take you from this curve. You walk in my office at 50, 55, and this is Mark's story, right? You're feeling crummy, you're on pills, but diet and lifestyle is so powerful that now you can go up and you regain your health. Okay, so you're feeling better than you were years ago, more functional. And this is what's exciting to me. If you look at this sort of schematically, this difference between how you feel or how you would have felt and how you can feel with an optimal diet and lifestyle could be as short as a few weeks, a couple months. You're feeling better, you have improved health. So the benefit can be very rapid, and people can feel it very quickly on their way to optimal health for whatever their circumstances are, and then getting back to that optimal life curve. So this is where, as a physician, as a medical system, this is a very, very exciting thing. And a lot of physicians are stuck in the idea that diet and lifestyle is a preventive thing, and that's it. And there's now ample evidence that we need to think more about treatment. In fact, a year ago, the United States Preventive Services Task Force recommended, and this is the major body that sets guidelines for screening services and other preventive services, and they said all adults who are overweight or obese and they have risk factors for heart disease, this is like high cholesterol, high blood pressure, okay, these are most of the patients in our system. These are many of the patients that we see regularly in our system. They recommend that all of these folks be referred to intensive behavioral counseling interventions to promote healthful diet and physical activity. Okay, so they're saying that most of the patients in our system should be referred for treatment with diet and lifestyle. Okay, the evidence is there. How many of you have been referred to intensive diet and lifestyle? Maybe you don't fit this category anyway, but it doesn't happen. Okay, it doesn't happen. We are starting at the University of Rochester a program we call Program for Nutrition and Medicine, and to address this gap of the missing link, the diet and lifestyle link. And we're setting up a program within the primary care network of the University of Rochester Medical Center, where we see patients for consultations individually for an hour-long visit. We also have small group programs that go for 8 weeks, lifestyle intensives to help people change. And we are going to be starting a 1-week immersion, sort of health vacation kind of thing for out-of-town folks next year. We also do low-cost community seminars once a month. We feed people lunch and have a medical topic. And then we also want to get into medical education research, working with residents to help train them and give them experience in whole food plant-based diet as treatment, and then get research going as well. So what are we doing? What's our medicine? What's our big thing? It's this. It's a whole food plant-based diet is the base of our intervention. We do encourage exercise. Exercise is wonderful for many, many things, many outcomes. But it's not as structured, and if you're going to really focus on getting any one thing right, it's a whole food plant-based diet, in my opinion. Get that right, number one. Get that right, number 1, 2, and 3. and the exercise on top of it is great. Stress management is also very important to make sure that you're doing these things the right way and sticking with it. And we got to pay attention to our emotions and our mindfulness and taking control of our stress, because this can kind of eat away at all these other efforts. What do I talk about a whole food plant-based diet? When my dad and I were at the China study, we didn't see a lot of this terminology, plant-based diet. It was the Atkins diet era. And whole food plant-based diet, we intentionally didn't use the word vegan. We used the whole food plant-based diet. Let me explain that a little bit. In my mind, there's three food groups. There's an animal food group. Okay, this is any sort of animal or anything that comes from animal. This is an easy one. Meat, dairy, and eggs. There's a whole plant group. This is also pretty easy. Anything you find outside at the farmer's market today, if they're fruits, vegetables, whole grains, things that came out of the dirt, from the tree, from the bush, relatively unprocessed, the things that nature provided as nature provided them. But you have another group, and this is the refined plant food group. And we have to realize how much of a problem this is in our culture. When I say refining, there's a lot of different ways to think about that. My personal interpretation of refining is when you take the food that nature provided, you break it up into smaller bits, and then you just consume one bit of it. Either you break it up either chemically or mechanically, and you're just consuming a part. You're pulling it apart or refining and taking out the processing it in some way. You're just consuming one part of the original food. Sugar is a big offender in this country. Oils is a very big offender in this country, and all sorts of white flours are very commonly overconsumed. And even among the vegan community and other communities, they say, oils, what? Are you nuts? I don't like you as much anymore. Let me spend just a brief minute on why I'm putting oils in here. If you just take one example, a soybean, you can look at a soybean as nature provided it, and it has an absolute abundance of nutrients. And it's an incredibly nutrient-dense food. It's very high in protein. It has plenty of fat, most of the polyunsaturated fats. It has lots of carbohydrate, but it comes with a ton of fiber, and there's a ton of fiber in beans. It has a lot of minerals, okay? Calcium, iron. There's a lot of calcium in this bean. There's a lot of iron in this bean. There's a lot of vitamins in this bean. And when you process it to make soybean oil, what do you do with all this stuff? Okay, you throw it all away, and you're left with a totally profoundly protein deficient food, a fiber deficient food, a mineral deficient food. There may be some vitamins sometimes that are carried over in oils, but you lose almost everything except for the fat, just pure fat. Now you can do this with olives, okay, and olive oil, canolas. It's the same story every single time. Coconuts, coconut oil, it's the same thing over and over and over. You're throwing away all the nutrients, and if nutrients have anything to do with disease, you realize you're eating a totally nutrient-depleted food. That's the most calorie-dense food you can eat. And so that's what I mean by a processed plant food. Now, let's take a step back and think about those three food groups quickly. And this is the most numbers here I'll talk about. But this is a blend of 500 calories of each food group. So this is a blend of mangoes, peas, broccoli, kale, and oats, 500 calories. And if you eat 500 calories of food, roughly, by most recommendations, you should get about 12.5 grams of protein. 12.5 grams of protein by most recommendations is just the protein you need. For growth and maintenance, that's going to be enough. Okay, so whole plants here have way more than 12.5. This particular blend has 29 grams of protein. Realize that if you're eating whole plants, you're getting more than enough protein. A wide variety of whole plants, you're getting more than enough protein. There's absolutely no problem. Don't need to think about it. Be done thinking about it. There is some fat in this whole plant blend, okay? So that's another myth. This is not fat-free. It's just naturally lower in fat, but there's actually fat in that broccoli. There's fat in a tomato. There's fat in kale. There are small amounts of fat in these foods. Some obviously have more than others. There's lots of carbohydrate here. This is a high number. But you know what? It comes with a ton of fiber. I mean, these are complex carbohydrates that are loaded with fiber in this blend. Absolutely loaded with fiber. And look at this. No milk. And you're still at 410 milligrams of calcium and 500 calories. So there's a ton of calcium. There's a ton of minerals. There's iron. These numbers, let's put up a comparison here. I do want to note there's no B12 in plants. There's also no cholesterol in plants. Let's compare it with animal foods. This is a blend of whole milk, chicken, beef, salmon, and egg. And you'll see that there's a lot more protein. Okay, so there's more protein in a smaller package in animal foods generally. And that's, in my mind, when you look at some of the evidence, and if you read the China study, I won't get into that too much in this talk, I think this is a very dangerous thing. This is not a good thing. This is a bad thing to avoid. These foods, animal foods, are naturally higher in fat. So traditionally, when you looked at traditional cultures that didn't have oils or sugars or a lot of the added fats, the amount of fat they ate basically represented the amount of animal foods they ate, because these foods are naturally higher in fat. You know, you're eating an animal or their milk. There's not much carbohydrate. I mean, a little bit of sugar in milk, for example, a little bit of lactose. There's no fiber. Fiber's only in plants, not in animals. And then the minerals here in this sample, this calcium comes from milk, but you're doing better with the whole plants. There's more iron in the whole plants. Now, it's a different form of iron, and that matters, but just realize that whole plants, you're getting plenty of iron. There's more potassium in the plants. And then the vitamins, the real differences sprout when you talk about the vitamins and antioxidants. Plants are really the factories of a lot of our vitamins and antioxidants in nature, and sometimes thousands of fold more common for some vitamins. Animal foods do have B12, where plants do not. They also have cholesterol. Cholesterol is only found in animal foods. So let's look at the last group, okay, the refined plant group. And what you see, remember for this 500, this is a blend of potato chips, spaghetti, cola, donuts, and Italian dressing. And this is like a University of Michigan, late night snack. Speaking of the University of Michigan, I am so thrilled, Mark. This must be painful for you almost to be here during the game. But but I didn't hear it at all. That's dedication. That's dedication. So there's fat in here. There's the oils. There's lots of carbohydrates. So this is like the bad carbs that people are eating. But look at this. There's no fiber. So over here you have 27 grams of fiber in these complex carbs. Over here there's 1.8. So there's almost no fiber. This is that very processed food fragment. You're losing all this good stuff. And then here, look, it's even worse than the animal foods. You have calcium, you have terrible minerals, you have terrible vitamins. This is why we supplement. This is why this is not a fortified blend here. I've purposely left this unfortified. This is why we fortify this junk, because without it, it's just plain naked energy. It's nutrient deficient. So this is an important thing. If you stop eating animal foods, that's not the whole story. It's not just animal. It's not just becoming vegan by the strict definition. You can't if you fall off this column and you go over here, you're not going to be healthy. You're going to have problems. You got to fall off this column in the middle and go over here. Have what we call a whole food plant-based diet. So this is what most Americans are eating. If you put these three food groups, think mac and cheese, think hot dogs, hamburgers, pizza. You have lots of white flour. This is, by the way, this is just my impression. This is not based on survey data. So you have lots of white flour. We eat tons of white flour. We eat a lot of sugar. We eat a lot of added oils. And then we usually use those things as flavorings and to make the meat and dairy as delivery vehicles for meat and dairy. That's what we usually do. Is use the processed foods as delivery vehicles for meat and dairy. Pizza, the hot dogs, the hamburgers, all American foods, right? We might get a whole plant if someone shoves some iceberg lettuce in front of us now and then, or we're going to be virtuous and have some overcooked green beans maybe with our dinner or something. We might have potatoes and French fries. We might have some tomatoes on the burger, whatever. It's a tiny sliver of whole plants, but really not much. Where do we need to go? And this is why we're sick. This is why we're sick. Okay, there's no mystery to this. This is why we're sick. What we need to do is go to more whole food plant-based diets. We need to increase this, totally flip this around. We need to totally flip this around and have more whole plants and minimize our refined plants and animal-sourced foods. And I think the closer we get to this with a B12 supplement, I think actually the better we do. And I'm not alone in thinking that we need more whole plants, at least, that part of it. Earlier this year, the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee recommended, they came out with this statement that kind of shook things up, and it has industry pretty unhappy. They say the major findings regarding sustainable diets were that a diet higher in plant-based foods, such as vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds, and lower in calories in animal-based foods, is more health-promoting and is associated with less environmental impact than is the current U.S. diet. That's actually I was very impressed when I saw that. The president of the American College of Cardiology, Dr. Kim Williams, says, I often discuss the benefits of adopting a plant-based diet with patients who have high cholesterol, diabetes, hypertension, or coronary artery disease. And he's talking about a strict low-fat plant-based diet. And then even in cancer, which is sort of doesn't get touched too much by nutrition, but even in cancer, in the American Institute for Cancer Research, came out with an expert report, accumulation of a lot of research and data looking at called Food, Nutrition, Physical Activity and the Prevention of Cancer, a global perspective. They found that a predominantly plant-based diet, as in the New American Plate, that's their scheme, the New American Plate, may reduce the risk of cancer. Not only do vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and other plant-based foods provide an array of cancer-protective compounds, but a predominantly plant-based diet is a powerful tool in weight management, which in turn affects cancer risk. And even the American Cancer Society, if you look on their website, sort of buried in there, they're not super friendly to the idea of nutrition, but they even use this terminology, plant-based diet, recommending more plant-based diet. So just in the past couple of years, there's been significant changes, and there's institutional. Kaiser came out with a paper recommending plant-based diets for their physicians, and even celebrities. Here's Beyonce. Celebrities kind of, like all of us, celebrities can try one thing for 2 weeks and then say, oh, screw that, I'm going to do the opposite thing for the next 2 weeks. So it's kind of, you find a weird, wild mix of things. But Beyonce has recently been touting a plant-based diet. And I love this quote from her: the benefits of a plant-based diet need to be known. We should spend more time loving ourselves, which means taking better care of ourselves with good nutrition and making healthier food choices. Okay, that's so true. So why is the base of our intervention in Rochester a whole food plant-based diet? And this is just skimming off the very top of the research. Some studies that many of you, if you're in this community, you've probably heard of. But the Lifestyle Heart Trial by Dr. Dean Ornish now is published. This was started over 20 years ago. And basically, they looked at people with advanced heart disease. They actually measured the blockages in their arteries, the average size of the blockages in their arteries, and that's what this means. Diameter stenosis. That's the size of the blockage in each of their arteries. And they started out. They put one group in conventional care. The other group got diet and lifestyle. And mind you, the diet and lifestyle group did not get drugs. This was before statins were really widely used. This was just diet and lifestyle. It was a whole food plant-based diet. It was also exercise, group support, and some meditation, yoga. So it was a comprehensive lifestyle program, not just food, but certainly the food was fundamental. And after 1 year, what they showed was that the people who were on just diet and lifestyle intervention had a reversal of blockages. And their blockages actually were shrinking. The people who were on standard care, their condition got worse. And of course, this is where all of medicine is. This is where we live in medicine. This is all we know. This is how we function. Everybody's expected to get worse. And they do. And 5 years later, they followed this out 5 years. This wasn't just a 6-week study. 5 years later, you see even the bigger differences. People's heart disease blockages even shrunk more on average. And the people on standard care got worse. Okay? And he did some very interesting analyses looking at the people who followed the program better, the people who adhered to it the best, had the best results. So it's kind of like a dose-response relationship. Like the more of the good diet and lifestyle you have, the better your results. And if you just do it a little bit, your results aren't going to be as good, but you're still going to get better results. We also know from Dr. Esselstyn, who I know has been up here, is not too far from Ann Arbor, Detroit area. This was just as sort of an anecdote, that many of you, I'm sure, have heard. This slide has been around, made the rounds. But this is a 44-year-old surgeon colleague of his at the Cleveland Clinic who finished the surgery, sitting down to do some notes and documentation, and began to have pain in his chest, going up to his jaw, down his arm. He was having an acute heart attack there at work. They rushed him into the cath lab, and they took this picture of his artery, left anterior descending artery. And what they found was that it was this area through here. You can see all this narrowing. This area was too far. Is too big because of the anatomy. I don't know if it was too long or it was too long for stenting to safely stent. Its location and shape, it was too long to stent, and it was too far down the artery to bypass. So they couldn't do any procedures to get around this thing. There was no surgery. So they said, well, start these medications, go home, and wait and see, basically, like every other patient, right? That wasn't good enough for him. So he went down the hall, and he had heard of Dr. Esselstyn, who had been doing reversal of heart disease research. And he asked him, look, I don't want to do this, and I want something better. I heard you doing some interesting things. And so he went on the Dr. Esselstyn diet at the time, which was very strict, like Dr. Ornish, but no animal foods at all, zero zilch, none, no fish, no milk, nothing, and no oil, not a drop of oil, no minimized processed foods, really almost a whole food plant exclusive diet, essentially. And he followed it very well because he's 44 years old, he has a family, and it meant, 3-bean soup to him was less extreme than sitting around waiting for the other shoe to drop. Okay? Waiting for the other shoe to drop is hard. Eating 3-bean soup is not hard. And in 2.5 years, this is what happened. It totally opened up. I mean, he had a soft plaque here, and it melted away. His cholesterol dropped from 156 to 89. His LDL cholesterol dropped from 97 to 38. And Dr. Esselstyn, he published this. He's now at the Cleveland Clinic Wellness Institute, who's done for years now, actually decades, seeing patients there. And he's had 198 patients do his seminar and learn about his diet. These are heart disease patients, and he followed them out. He contacted and followed them out, and on average, there were people who were contacted or followed out for a little over 3.5 years. And out of 200 patients that he's had, about 90% of them adhered to this very strict diet, and 11% did not. Of the people who followed it well, there were about 18 events total, cardiac events. And so there was about 10% event recurrence rate, 10%. But when you look at what was causing these events, as Dr. Esselstyn and the other authors of the paper did, when you looked at what caused the events, many of these events were unrelated to progression of heart disease. They were related, for example, to former instrumentation that was had caused issues. And when they looked at each event, they broke it down from their interpretation. They estimated that one event out of this group was actually due to progression of disease. So one event out of 198 people, which is a recurrence rate of less than 1%, actually due to progression of disease. Of the people who didn't follow the diet and fell off the wagon, they had a 62% recurrence rate. That's actually quite high on average compared to studies. These folks were pretty sick. So we know now that this diet, and by the way, this was a diet that did not include other lifestyle interventions. This was just diet. That's all he tells people, just diet. Exercise is wonderful, great. I mean, if you meditate, yoga, great. But that's not part of it. What you need to do and focus on is diet. That's it. So pretty impressive results. And I'm not going to go too much into this, but this was Dr. Neil Barnard and his group recently published looking at a large review study looking at weight loss and showing basically that vegan or vegetarian interventions, they do cause weight loss. You can lose weight from a wide variety of approaches. It doesn't have to be vegan or vegetarian. In fact, there's plenty of studies that show that other methods of weight loss are just as good in many other studies. But this we have to think about weight loss consistent with long-term health. And I think that this is just a slide to show that you can lose weight on this diet too. So people who were randomized to vegan or vegetarian lost 7 pounds. People who actually finished it lost 9 pounds in these studies. I'm not going to go too much into this, but randomized controlled trials looking at plant-based diets on cholesterol levels generally show that cholesterol levels drop anywhere from 20 to 40 in these particular studies. These were actually not the whole food plant-based diets. And most of that is the unhealthy LDL cholesterol. The HDL cholesterol, quote-unquote good cholesterol, might drop a little bit, particularly at first, but overall it's, in these studies, not a big difference. And then diabetes. So we're talking about, I'm showing you more metabolic diseases here. Diabetes reversal. So we've known for decades that you can put people in jail, or I call it jail. Some people call it a fancy resort. But if you control everything they eat, it's the same thing. And this was at the Pritikin Center, and it was a very luxurious, wonderful place to be. But people with diabetes went to the Pritikin Center, and they were given a whole food plant-based diet, not 100% vegan or even vegetarian, but a whole food plant-based diet. They were given some exercise prescription. They also, for those who are very overweight, they were watching their calorie intake. But of this group, 17 were on insulin at the beginning. Within 1 week, 10 of them were off insulin. Within another week, another one was off insulin. Within another week, 2 more were off insulin. And they published, again, long-term data looking at these results of these patients a couple years out. If they stuck with it, they stuck with the benefits. So people who had been on medications, oral medications, there were about 23 people who came into the program on oral medications. 21 of them were off of the oral medications within 3 weeks. So, and the effect, the benefit persisted long-term as long as people stuck with it, at least for a few years. And their blood sugar went down. This was just to show that they're being pulled off their medications and their blood sugar was going down at the same time. It was benefit on top of benefit. And this was Dr. Neil Barnard and PCRM group showing that, and I probably should have Carolyn present this slide, but people with diabetes randomized to either a low-fat vegan diet, low-glycemic vegan diet, or a conventional care diet. Now, I see this all the time, and what I like about this slide is that I have never seen a diabetic go to a nutritionist or a dietitian who doesn't come back to me talking about carbs. Counting carbs, watching carbs. That happens. That's the standard of care, and this is in this study they had that standard of care, and this is what happened to their blood sugar. It got better. But the people who were on low-fat vegan diet, who weren't counting calories, weren't necessarily counting every single thing in every single meal. They were just making the right food choices up front and eating what they wanted once they made the right food choice, eating the amount that they wanted, had actually a better response. Their blood sugar actually improved more than conventional treatment. And one of the interesting papers out of this was that people adhered, in this study, people adhered to the low-fat vegan diet as well as the conventional treatment. So out goes the window the thought that nobody's going to do it, because people did it. And they did it as well as this complicated carb counting stuff is not easy either. And then that's metabolic disease. And prostate cancer is one of the more exciting bits of research. You know, there's I think a big need in terms of for cancer research, particularly treatment of cancer. I think there's a lot of research we need, but one of the more exciting bits of research out of the past 10 years is Dr. Dean Ornish, again, who reversed heart disease, used the same diet and lifestyle program on men with early-stage prostate cancer. These were men who were doing watchful waiting. They, were not doing, it was sort of low-grade early prostate cancer. And we follow prostate cancer with this PSA, and many of you have heard of this, prostate-specific antigen. And if the level goes up, that's bad. You know, that's when you get more interventions, follow up closely, more biopsies, et cetera, because it's a signal of the cancer. So if it goes up, it's bad. If it goes down, good, excellent. And so what he showed is that men who were under usual urology care, they got worse. Like every other patient in our medical system, they get worse. The people who were on the comprehensive diet and lifestyle program actually had improvements in their PSA levels after 1 year. These are not enormous changes, but you know, for what often is a slow-growing prostate cancer, like a prostate cancer, this is what the direction you want to go. You're going to be going down here. And then they published studies that I won't get into where looking at gene expression. The men in this group had better gene expression, so they actually changed their gene expression. The pro-cancer genes were turned off. The anti-cancer genes were turned on, so they were changing their gene expression. Their blood was actually able to better fight off cancer growth compared to the control men. So they looked at this in many different ways, and it's very, very interesting. But you know, impressive stuff. It's a whole food, plant-based diet and comprehensive lifestyle changes. And here's the thing about our society is that this, you know, as we're being crippled by the cost of healthcare, we're sitting here arguing about who's paying the bill when really we need to be talking about decreasing the bill or eliminating the bill. You know, using less healthcare, not worrying about who's paying, or disease care, not worrying about who's paying for the disease care. This was Dr. Dean Ornish. Once he had his lifestyle heart trial findings published, he used multiple centers to spread his intervention across different areas, different hospitals, and followed what happened. And basically, the people who looked at it from a financial point of view, and he had 330 patients with coronary artery disease, about 200 at 8 different sites. And what they did is these were all people who were eligible for intervention. So these were sick enough patients with symptoms or other characteristics that they could have gone to their cardiologist and they could have said they could have gotten a stent or a bypass. These were sick folks. Okay, that's who he was studying. And instead, he had them go into the diet and lifestyle program. He said, no, hold off on procedures, go diet and lifestyle. And what he showed in terms of the health outcomes is that the diet and lifestyle folks did just as well as the control group, as the matched group did. So they did They did just as well. There was no loss of health by postponing the procedures and doing diet and lifestyle. There was no bad outcome. And while they were doing this, they were saving a ton of money. So over 3 years of costs, the lifestyle patients cost about $18,000. And the control group, the patients who go ahead and get the procedures, cost about $50,000, just under. And the difference over just 3 years is $30,000. Okay, and it's this data that's so exciting that after so much effort now, his program is actually covered by Medicare for heart disease rehabilitation, because anybody it took him an awful lot of work and time and effort. But anybody, rationally looking at this has got to say, well, we got to do this, right? There's no harm to patients, and we're saving a boatload of money. So now we do it. This I'm going to skip that for time. So why do you go to your doctor and still get treated as if you're going to be on lifetime medicine? You're only going to get worse. Take some more pills, and try the Mediterranean diet or maybe a low carb diet, or just lose weight. See you later. That's unfortunately the standard. And let me just say, despite that characterization, that I have really the utmost respect. I'm a practicing family doctor, and my fellow colleagues, whether it's in emergency medicine, primary care, my fellow doctors have been some of the most amazing people I've met. Very hardworking, very caring. The people who trained me are some of the most selfless people. I don't think I'll ever be as good a person as some of these folks. They are so selfless in the pursuit of their patients' care. Really, I mean that from the deepest part of my heart. But they don't talk about nutrition because it's not part of our system. We live in a paradigm that nutrition is just simply not allowed into. And one of the reasons is we don't get trained in nutrition. So we genuinely have no idea any of the research I just told you, except for maybe Dean Ornish. I mean, even that tiny, tiny sampling, physicians don't know any of that. They don't know any of that, except for maybe the Dean Ornish. But the bulk of my physician colleagues just don't know this stuff. And education, this is now an old story. 1958, the American Medical Association did a survey of medical schools. They found that 20% of medical schools offer a special course on nutrition. Okay. And this was so the last vitamin was discovered not terribly before this. It was actually B12, not too many years before this. And, as in the early 1900s, nutrition was in its heyday. We were discovering a lot of micronutrients, a lot of the essential vitamins. And people were looking around the world and they were seeing areas of deficiency from people not having enough vitamins. And they were discovering the vitamin, and then they were learning how to recreate the vitamin and make supplements, and then make a pill. You were giving it to people. People with deficiency were getting better. I mean, this was medicine. Nutrition was medicine through much of the early 1900s. There were more than a dozen Nobel Prizes awarded, for nutrition. So nutrition was at its heyday. But as medicine gets smaller and smaller, looking at a more and more detailed scope of health within the cell, and nutrition stopped discovering essential vitamins, the gap just grew and grew between nutrition and medicine. And so people started to notice, and that's why they did this survey, that nutrition is no longer part of medicine. They found that very few schools were even teaching it in 1958. And this kind of built up some steam, some discussion. The American Medical Association had a council, or sort of a committee on food and nutrition, and they held a conference. They said, this is inadequate. We need to change this. Back in 1963, okay? This is not good. A few years passed, and the U.S. government, the Senate Select Subcommittee on Nutrition and Human Needs, was looking at this issue of nutrition and the health of the American population and how this fit into medicine. And they said, this is a problem. There's clearly a problem here. This bled over into the White House, that had a whole conference on food, nutrition, and health. They said the situation's, there's a problem here. There's a disconnect, essentially. And a few years passed, another survey was done, all this mumbling and groaning, and another survey in 1976, 20 years after the first one by the American Medical Association, found that less than 20% of schools require a separate nutrition course. So some folks, some places were really mumbling and grumbling at some pretty high areas, and nothing was happening. A few years later, and Congress gets on the act, and had the U.S. General Accounting Office sort of testify on the state of this issue, and it was clear that everyone agreed we need more funding for this. This is not an adequate situation, and some good words. And 6 years later, the National Academy of Sciences had a whole expert panel, National Research Council, had a whole expert panel on this topic in 1985. They did another survey, a well-done survey. They found that 20% of schools, medical schools, have a separate required course in nutrition. They further characterized in this survey how many hours of instruction that medical students get, and they found that it's 21 hours in 4 years of medical school. 21 hours, okay? Medical school is a grueling, all-consuming thing for 4 years. To spend 21 hours on it is stupid. I mean, people spend more time on that on beer, and in the first year. Not good. So let's fast forward, and they actually came out with a really nice. If you read this report, they came out with a really nice set of guidelines and recommendations in 1985 about how to treat this. You need to have more funding, but not only it's not just more funding, it's comprehensive, looking at getting experts into medical schools, making the connections between health outcomes and nutrition, and comprehensive ways to address this. And the report came out, and I was like, does a tree make a sound? What's the thing? If it falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, does a NAS report make a sound if it comes off the press and no one's there to catch it? I don't know. Let's fast forward a little bit more recently. Another survey, 2009. Another survey found 25% of schools have a separate required course on nutrition, and they further characterized it again, found that 20 contact hours of medical school, 4 years of medical schools on nutrition. And I can tell you that this is actually optimistic. Okay, when you go in medical school, nutrition consists of like the Krebs cycle, the citric acid cycle, protein metabolism, some fat metabolism, briefly, and then you move on. And that's all considered nutrition. That's all nutrition. We're not learning about reversing diabetes with diet or treating heart disease with diet. We're learning goofy biochemistry stuff a lot of times. This was my experience as well. So now we have the American Medical Association, the U.S. Congress, White House, General Accounting Office, American Association of Medical Colleges, the Liaison Committee for Medical Education, which is very important. They set a lot of expectations and testing stuff. The National Academy of Sciences, National Research Council, all these people over the past 50 plus years have said, this situation's inadequate, it needs to change, we need more funding, X, Y, Z, and nothing has happened. Nothing has happened. So this is one aspect of the problem. It's not the whole problem, it's one aspect. At the Program for Nutrition and Medicine, we will have preventive medicine residents working with us early on. I'm confident if we can get this off the ground, we'll have family medicine residents working with us, learning about actually treating patients with a whole food plant-based diet. We just finished a group lifestyle intensive. People lost, not everybody, this is the whole group, several of whom didn't have to lose weight. People were losing a pound or two a week without counting calories, without doing anything other than making the right food choice. Make the right food choice on your plate. This is what we're doing at the University of Rochester. This is a video that we have. I just want to share. It's really quite amazing what we ask our patients to do as physicians. We ask patients in our system to trust us with major surgery. We ask patients to take medications for their illness that may have various serious side effects. Here at the Program for Nutrition and Medicine, we want to add a new dimension to treatment, and that is treating the cause of so many of our chronic illnesses, diet and lifestyle.
Here at the University of Rochester, Program for Nutrition and Medicine, we want to help you live your healthiest possible life. To do this, we have consultations. You can come in and see us for an office visit, or you can come to one of our more intensive programs, including our 8-week class and our immersion program. If you want to learn a little bit more about living a healthy lifestyle, as well as our programs, you can come to one of our community outreach events, during which we have lecture and discussion of a nutrition or lifestyle topic, as well as a delicious plant-based meal. One of our most powerful tools is a healthy diet. We believe that a healthy diet is a plant-based diet. A plant-based diet consists of a rich variety of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, and other legumes, as well as healthy starches such as sweet potatoes. The next question you might have is, what does a plant-based meal look like? And a plant-based meal can be sweet potato enchiladas, it can be mushroom and spinach lasagna, it can be a pineapple stir fry. And at our programs, we want to help you make these meals easy and tasty and familiar to really help you enjoy this food.
We recognize that participating in these programs is a big investment for our patients. And really our goal at the Program for Nutrition and Medicine is to make this investment absolutely the most efficient use of your resources as possible. So really at the end of the day, you have the best outcomes that you possibly can, not just in 2 months, 3 months, but for the rest of your life. So the U of R tagline is medicine of the highest order. And one of our patients, is one of the nicest things that I think someone said at the end of our 8-week program, said that this program is medicine of the highest order. This is now true medicine of the highest order. I think that medicine is taking notice. I'm very optimistic, actually, that this type of thing is coming to medicine. Might be a while, but it's on its way. If you want more information about the science and some of my work, the China study, which I co-authored with my dad, and the Campbell Plan, which is a how-to companion for the book, a lot more about the specific aspects of the diet and some of the science behind specific aspects as regards to nutrition, and menu plans and recipes. And then I'm also the medical director for the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies. This is our website down here. We have a ton of, we're really built out our website. We have a lot of recipes. We have a big recipe database. We have a ton of articles, a ton of science from a variety of people that you can all download, read, and search for free. That's very good. One of the things that I'm so optimistic about, I'll just end with this, is that, last night, for example, we had a dinner at the Back to Roots restaurant, and it was wonderful how people got a chance to stand up. And in this community, there's really a vibrant, wide range of people from a lot of different backgrounds who are taking notice of this power of nutrition. And it's growing. I mean, Mark and Kim and what they're doing, Chickpea and Bean, I see this everywhere I go. I see there's just this bubbling over, and it's coming from the ground up. And physicians are, who have their eyes open, are absolutely along for the ride and have been riding this for a long time too. So I'm very optimistic. And now in the past year, I can't tell you how incredible it is in the past year for all those institutional statements that I mentioned before. I think I'm actually very, very optimistic that we're moving towards a better healthcare system. So thank you all for your time and attention, and I think we have some time for questions and answers. Okay. Yeah.
Well, thank you for presenting all this information. I feel like this is something that was sort of mysterious for me. My partner of 19 years does plant-based. I have a pot roast in my refrigerator at home, but I want to try this. There's one thing for me, though, that's a sticking point. Everything you said makes sense, but when I get up early in the morning and I have tea, I like to sweeten it. But what I use to sweeten it is white sugar, which is one of the refined foods you mentioned. What's an alternative that I can use? Everything else seems entirely doable. For the first time, I can say everything seems entirely doable. It seemed like an uphill slog, but that seems to be the one thing that I have the most trouble with. What do I use? Because I like to have my tea in the morning.
Right. So the question for those who can't hear, there's with a partner who is plant-based, and this gentleman has been struggling with it, and his question is particularly for sweeteners in the morning tea instead of sugar. Is there something else you can use? And I, looking in the whole context of your diet, okay, the best optimal thing for you is to not use any sweetener, and just change your taste. There's good evidence that sugar is very highly addictive. substance. And it's a rough transition, but just getting away from needing that sugar is going to pay dividends to your health. I will say, if we were speaking very quietly, privately, if you are doing everything perfectly, and the rest of your meals are great, I think where from a human nutrition point of view, depending on whatever illnesses you may or may not be struggling with, a few percentage points of our diet from different things now and then, if that's what it takes for you to stay on the diet, to have a percentage point here or there, that's not optimal for all your calories. Depending on your condition and your illnesses, I'm not one to hit people over the head if you're really doing all the other stuff right. My guess is that for people who are making this change, what I think happens is that as you start doing, that sugar is going to be the last holdout. It's going to be the thing that you can't stop. And then what's going to happen though, as you improve other meals, maybe you feel more confident or motivated by your own good actions and other meals. That sugar's hold on you might actually start to weaken. So as we do good things in one area of our life, often, not always, often we want to do good things in other areas of our life. So it starts to this goodness kind of bleeds over.
There's no alternative that you can really.
I don't suggest artificial sweeteners, and I don't suggest sort of the quote unquote natural sweeteners. They're just, from my point of view, they're all just sugar. So my stand on salt. This is where you get into trouble with the nutritional research when you try to isolate the effect of one component of the diet, and salt is certainly a small component of an overall diet and lifestyle. And some evidence I've seen certainly does link it to high blood pressure, but not all evidence. They've done some studies on if you lower your salt, in fact, too much to an extremely low salt intake, there's actually some evidence that it causes worse outcomes for people with congestive heart failure, for example, which is interesting. So I think that it's a mixed bag, but I think that where we get most of our salt in this country is processed foods, prepared foods. If you get away from that stuff and you want to use a little shake of salt on your food, I have no problem with that. So that's just my interpretation. I have no problem with adding a little bit of salt afterwards. Just avoid the processed stuff.
I wanted to thank you and your father for the China study. In 2004, I read it, and since that time, I've lost well over 150 pounds.
Wow. Wonderful. So you lost 150 pounds. So that's a lot. Congratulations. That's incredible. Congratulations. Yeah.
This is leading to a question about how to talk to family, but also a kinship with what just happened. I wanted to thank you for the China study. My mother is a type 2 diabetic. I was diagnosed a few and I was crying with my partner in the parking lot of Whole Foods. I found Dr. Barnard's Reversing Diabetes book, and I had so many medicines. My triglycerides were over 400. They're now 80. I lost 155 pounds.
Oh my goodness.
Most of that without exercising, but now my body wants to run. I run 5 to 6 miles most days of the week, and it's amazing how much your body wants to get stronger, how much work it takes to be unhealthy. And what I wanted to ask you is, when we have wonderful people that we're so grateful, this is the most exciting time in nutrition. When you come to town, something that so floored me is I was sent to U of M for the diabetes education classes, and they actually are honest with you and say, this will slow things down, what we tell you here, but you will eventually wind up on insulin. And when I went back, but then I found the books and did what I was doing and went back to my doctor, and I was frustrated, and I said, why don't they tell people about this? And her answer was, because the classes are geared toward 86% of the population, they don't want to hear it. And if any time a gold mine like you comes to town, can talk with the diabetes educators, because that option wasn't even given of a plant-based diet. And I've had this amazing turnaround in my life for many other illnesses. And this leads to my question of, with my mother, she's working with someone with a, international reputation, endocrinologist, but who doesn't believe in crazy diets. And on medication, her A1C, she's still overweight, but 7.8 to 7.6, and he's now wanting to see her less and saying, he basically pronounced her, he doesn't worry that she'll ever have any complications from diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how that's possible. And I'm wondering how you could address that question, and also when she says that, any ideas for a response for an open dialogue about this?
So I'm not going to try to repeat what you said. Obviously, the most amazing thing you said is you lost 155 pounds. You now exercise. That when you started doing good things in one part of your life, you started doing good things in other parts of your life. I mean, you should be giving this lecture and answering these questions. You know it. Your question was for working with family members who are working within the medical system and not getting this message, and it's frustrating you. And I can tell you that physicians, the standard of care, like I mentioned several times, the expectation and the standard is that all of these chronic diseases are chronic forever and they get worse. That's the experience of where we are as a culture. And so when somebody says, your sugar is okay, 7.5, you're not going to have any complications, that's a real shame to me, because it just means that there's not necessarily an increased risk of complications beyond what we expect from diabetics. So we know you're diabetic, we expect you to have all the but you're not. You're doing just as well as the other ones, so there's no complications. But you know what? The risk of heart disease is still sky high. It's very much a shame that we just have such low expectations for patients' health. But that's the standard of care, and it's not even that the endocrinologist or the other doctor, it's not that they're a bad person. It's just that that's the world we live in. And so how do you address that? Unfortunately, there is truth to the fact that people don't change. I'm sure all of you have. Not all, I can't obviously, but many of you or most of you maybe even have family members or friends who have health conditions or health problems, and maybe you've discussed this, maybe you haven't, or you see how they've discussed nutrition or thought about nutrition, and they just have zero interest in changing their diet. And so that's even as a physician, when I tell people, an awful lot of people, in a brief office visit, and I just give them some information, most people are not interested. I can say that the diet is more important than these drugs, procedures. You can get off of these medicines, and most, but not all, but many patients have no interest in pursuing that conversation further. So I don't know the answer to that. What can you say? Unfortunately, you can't. You can have a lot of very frustrating conversations if you're trying to badger people. Or point out what you view as the errors in their logic, and it doesn't really work. The more we conflict, the more we butt heads on this, the more the other side digs their heels in. The more they talk, the more they pronounce their own point of view. You make them pronounce their own point of view, the more strongly they're going to feel that point of view. So this butting heads in our interactions, whether family, friends, doctors, whatever, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. You get lead by example as you're doing, and when people do have an opening, and some genuine questioning, you can use that door.
So I'm not crazy. It was not logical when he said there's no chances of complication with an A1C.
Right. Of course, there's just standard complications, and standard complications are acceptable. Okay. All the way in the back. In the center.
Happened recently is Time magazine, I think it was, came out with butter is back or bacon is back, and I run into a lot of people who say, oh, you need the fats for brain development and not to have Alzheimer's, and it gets so confusing out there. But I have also read, it might be through Neil Barnard or others of you all's ilk, great stuff, great people, who say that actually things like the Mediterranean diet, where olive oil is being touted, is that people are eating so much in the way of fresh fruits and vegetables, and that's the factor that helps them. But I just thought you might talk about some of the, a little more about the oils, because it is darn confusing out there.
Yeah, so this recent hubbub about saturated fat and some of the confusion about that. Nutrition is a messy science. It's a messy science, and it lends itself to a lot of confusion and a lot of people touting one thing based on this study, another thing based on that study. When you look, you have to step back and you have to put the time and look at the breadth and depth of the evidence. And this idea that saturated fat, first of all, we get too wrapped up in one nutrients. If you're interested in some of how this confusion comes about, read my father's book, The Whole. The Whole really talks about reductionism, how we get wrapped up into thinking about single nutrients and trying to make an assessment of overall diet based on single nutrients. So we find a few studies that can excuse saturated fat. So suddenly, we're making proclamations about bacon on dinner, and this is such a shame. I heard the author of one of the recent books touting this on an NPR show, and she was actually, someone called in from a healthcare profession in a hospital who was working with cardiac patients. And basically the whole conversation was about how they could just go ahead and eat plenty of animal foods, eat plenty of meat, eat plenty of fat. And I just thought about the damage that causes. When you look at the breadth and depth of evidence, and you look at observational studies and more plant-based diets linked to lower health, and you have to step back and look at the mountain of evidence. And when you see the breadth and depth, you see many of our metabolic diseases get better on a plant-based diet. We know Alzheimer's is related to metabolic diseases. We observe that people eating a plant-based diet have lower rates of metabolic diseases. We can see interventions where people eating a plant-based diet improve their metabolic diseases. We can we can do observational studies on older adults, and we see that people following a more Mediterranean diet or MIND diet, a sort of healthful, prudent diet, have much lower rates of cognitive decline or Alzheimer's. And these are variations of plant-based diets. Okay, these are plant-based diets. There's no study showing that people eating an Atkins diet or something on that, there's just nothing that they have much lower rates of Alzheimer's. Either intervention studies, mechanism studies, observational studies, there's nothing. So it's all pointing towards more plants, all of it more plants. And but people love to hear, as John McDougall says, people love to hear good things about their bad habits. So as soon as you have one study that excuses saturated fat, they are going to blow that on every headline, everywhere. It's going to get a bunch of eyeballs. People are going to love it. So you have all this confusion, and some of it's legitimate because nutrition is messy, and it's a lot of observational science that people are trying to make judgments on. But rest assured, eat more whole plants. And the oil thing, in my point of view, the oil thing is I can't speak to research on oil and brain decline. I can point to oil and heart disease, and point to some research where very low fat diets reverse heart disease, and in particular very metabolic studies looking at oil exposure being bad for blood vessel function. So you put the pieces together and you say, if oil is bad for your heart, it's bad for your blood vessels, what are the odds that it's going to be so good for your brain? Not very good. Not very good. So I think a more whole food plant-based diet is going to be good for your brain. Okay. So we're gonna wrap up, and I apologize. I normally chat with people for a while. I'm gonna have to run off and catch a plane, so I'm gonna head on out. Thank you again all for coming.
Thank you so much. So one last round. Thank you so much, Dr. Campbell, for joining us tonight. So folks, we thank you. Chickpea and Bean thanks you so much. Whole Foods, Veg Michigan and Back to Roots. We are, if you there's some Chickpea and Bean business cards on the back. We're going to be starting some diabetes classes that we're offering through PCRM, as my wife and I are Food for Life instructors as well. So check out our website if there's any information that you're looking for. We'll be more than happy to share that. Have a great day. Thank you so much for coming, folks. Take care.